Welcome to the podcast where sustainability gets real. I'm Alan Stenson, I'm your host, and in each episode we uncover the people, ideas and actions driving the journey to net zero. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone to the very first episode of Emission Possible, which is a podcast all about anything and everything to do with sustainability and the journey to net zero. We're going to be talking to some change leaders. We're going to be talking to people who are turning ambition into action and actually genuinely taking a very credible and proactive approach to getting to net zero, whatever that actually ends up looking like. And we're also here to really cut through the noise and actually make it even easier for people to actually really understand what sustainability is and what net zero is, and what the challenges are, what the successes need to be, and really having some frank conversations as well, talking to people who will be able to share their challenges, share their failures and what they learned from those failures, and also really hope to incentivize people, empower people to take their own action by sharing some of the successes that they've had. And hopefully what we end up discussing with our guests will resonate well and will actually fit in nicely with what people want to hear in terms of how to get to where we need to get to. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our very first guest. I'm incredibly excited to introduce Scott Armstrong from Eden 7. And funnily enough, this is someone who's actually been in this industry even longer than I have. I'm coming up to my 20th year. I think you've done over 30. And first thing to say is we clearly don't, either of us, look anywhere near old enough for that to even be possible. I think that's something that we can probably agree on.
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. But yeah, really, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the pod, and really excited to hear about some of your history in this industry.
Yeah, very happy to be here on your first episode, and I wish you all the best of luck with the podcast. I'll certainly be tuning in on a regular basis to see if I can pick up any pointers. You're absolutely right. 30 years working in energy and sustainability, and I started my career off actually working in the energy industry. So for an energy supplier, a natural gas supplier at the time, by the name of Agas, which soon became Elf Business Energy, which is now Total Energy in the UK. So right back in the early days of competition. But one of my roles actually was to look at how they were using their energy and help them use it more efficiently. So using interval data to drive decisions to actually reduce the need and the wastage of energy. I remember my first ever day working in this market was my boss at the time, a guy called David, took me out to a company called Dudley Drop Forgings, which is a huge heavy industry a drop forging company in the West Midlands. And I saw flames coming out of machines. I saw molten metal. And he said, look, the reason I wanted to bring you here is that this is what we do. So when you sit in an office, you're looking at contracts and you're looking at data, but this is the reality of what people do. This is how energy is used within industry, and the sheer amount of wastage that was going on in an old industry like that was huge, and businesses need help in terms of focusing on how to be more efficient in terms of their use. So I suppose that was my first day ever working in the job, and I got the bug. About how can I help them do things better? How can I help businesses to rely less on imported energy and more on the efficient use of energy within their overall operations. So that was kind of day one. I mean, I've had a varied career. I've sat on all sides of tables, working for energy suppliers, working for consultancy businesses and growing consultancy businesses in terms of energy and carbon risk management, and then also sitting on the side of the customer within a corporate business called Bourne Leisure, where I was head of energy and sustainability for nearly a decade until 2020.
Last summer you made a huge difference, didn't you? With I mean, I
Yeah.
read one of the stats in terms of the level of consumption reduction for them was just phenomenal.
Yeah, so I mean, it was over a 9-year period,
Right.
but we made a 43% reduction in our overall carbon footprint. And when you
Wow.
think of the leisure industry,
Mm,
it's highly energy intensive in terms of
mm,
its use. Yeah, swimming pools, need heat to heat the water to keep people warm when they use them. With 5-ish million customers a year in and out of facilities, accommodation blocks, static caravans, hotel rooms, in and out restaurants, bars, show bars, which are fantastic environment to be in the evening when you're away on holiday. Um, and you don't really think about how energy is used behind the scenes. And our focus was never to show the customer our workings, but just do the things behind the scenes that didn't impact on the enjoyment of their holiday,
mm.
didn't impact on anything that they would normally do, and therefore, tech and useful tech really came into play where that was concerned. So, yeah, the focus was very much on how we help the business to really drive actions, and I suppose that's been my career today. It's been about driving actions to make meaningful change in terms of carbon reductions. That's my passion. Corporate sustainability is absolutely my passion, and helping businesses to deliver on any ambitions that they've got, any commitments that they're making, and bring sustainability to life in their business. One of the things I often say to any heads of sustainability when I meet them is that your key role is to work towards your own redundancy. And I often get very funny looks from the people I'm talking to when I say that, but it's true. Sustainability shouldn't just be a function within an organization. It should be part of everybody's job.
Yeah.
And our jobs as heads of sustainability, whether we are working on a consultancy side or we're working within a business, is to do just that. It's to
Yeah.
manage the cultural change such that everybody thinks about sustainability in terms of every decision they make in their day-to-day lives. We do at
It's
home,
yeah.
so why don't we do it at work?
Yeah, absolutely right. It's absolutely key in terms of driving success on this because what's going to end up happening is that if it's too much from top down, suddenly people are just being told to do something and don't necessarily understand the relevance of what they're being asked to do. Every single decision a business makes is now or should now be made not just on price, for instance, but on impact. What is the result of me making this decision? If I commission that product or I buy that, buy that product or commission that service, what does that look like in terms of my carbon footprint? And is that decision helping or hindering my journey to net zero? Because there is an impact associated with that, and understanding what that is going to help you make decisions that are ultimately far better for the business and far better for the relationship that you have with that supply partner as well. But you're right. Everything we do, the modes of transport we choose, how we're engaging with our clients, what we're doing within the building, what we're doing when we're not in the building, all these
Yeah,
aspects
yeah, yeah.
have an impact, and being able to understand what that looks like and what can actually be done about it is going to be really key.
Yeah, I used to get really frustrated with people when I walked out of or walked past a room which was empty, and projectors were on and screens were on and all of this kind of thing. I said, look, would you do this at home?
Yeah, exactly.
Because
Yeah,
it's impacting on your pocket if you're doing it at home. So why are we doing it? Why do we think it's okay to do at
absolutely.
work?
Yeah.
It's a marginal piece, but it all starts with that. It's the little things that create the difference. Yes,
I was going to
and
say on that, how have you seen the industry change since the early days? I mean, obviously, you and I, as we mentioned at the beginning, despite how ridiculous it must be for us to have been in this for 2 or 3 decades, how have you seen the change, particularly over the last sort of 5 or 6 years? Where do you see those biggest changes showing?
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit further than 5 or 6 years, just to put it in context. I suppose when I started working in terms of energy efficiency, I would go into boardrooms and I'd be talking to business owners from the supply side about reducing their overall use of energy and therefore their impact on the environment. And I'd often get the glazed eye look. I'm sure you've seen it when you've been into some.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that for the first 5 years or so of my career, that was very much what we were seeing. Kyoto in '97 kind of woke a number of people up to climate change and the impacts of climate change, and if we are to let it go unabated. But last 5 or 6 years, I mean, gosh, it's been a roller coaster, hasn't it? It's just been incredible, really, since 2019 and Theresa May's last act as Prime Minister of signing the net zero into law. Unopposed, actually, from all sides of the House. It was unanimously supported. That kind of really drove the focus through until the COP in Glasgow in November 2021. And there we saw a rush of activity from corporates. Everybody wanted the PR story. Everybody wanted to be saying, I'm committing myself to net zero by 2030, 2035. Everyone wanted to have that sound bite.
Well, that's really interesting, because you're absolutely right. Bringing it sort of close, particularly within our geographical location, so the UK, that brought it mainstream. So everyone was talking about it. It was on the news. It was on, everyone's paper, everyone's newsfeed. But couple that with what ended up happening due to COVID and the lockdown and everything stopping, we sort of had that moment of people could see that this has gone from a theory, dare I say even a conspiracy, to its actual fact. Like when we stop emitting, nature comes back. We see air quality improve. We see dolphins swimming in the waters of Venice. These things are happening. And then bringing it to the mainstream, and then suddenly everyone's like, no, this is a real thing, and we do need to do something about it, and there's something that we can do about it. And I think it gave people a lot of confidence.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that period of reflection during the lockdown of 2020 and 2021 really made us start to think about what was around us. It got us out and about. I remember the days when we were only allowed out for an hour a day, to walk the dog or go for a run or whatever it was. But you spent the time in nature, and everybody was looking for areas of beauty to go and walk. They got to really appreciate it, but also we were kinder as a nation. We supported people. We were shocked by what was happening. We supported the NHS, and there was real kindness at that period. So coming out of that in the summer of 2021, we saw a big increase of people, of businesses, now thinking, okay, so what can we do? And that then drove us up to the November up in Glasgow, which was, I suppose, the pinnacle of the drive towards businesses becoming more sustainable and wanting to be seen to becoming more sustainable. Lots and lots of commitments being made. I think we're probably seeing a little reversal of that at the moment, and have been for the last 12 months or so, where people were very gung-ho in their approach back in late 2021 about making these commitments and making these statements without really thinking about, how do I do this? And you and I have spoken about this on many occasions, Alan. It's great to have a carbon footprint. it is great to understand where your emissions are and your hotspots around those, but that's day one of corporate consciousness around carbon reduction. You've then got to take that start point and build a trajectory of actions, and it is all about actions and impact, and then show how you as a business are going to achieve either what you promised back in those days, if you still have that level of ambition, or reset it to be a little bit more realistic. And we've seen lots and lots of businesses resetting it, and there's nothing wrong with that. I applaud it.
Yeah, well, it should be a very transparent approach. So if mistakes were made or further experience has been achieved because of the journey that you're currently on, then it is okay to say, well, actually, we got that wrong. We need to revisit that, and we need to set a new baseline, and we need to set new targets, and we need to be realistic because, with the best will in the world, there will be elements of your footprint that are right now unavoidable and you cannot influence to much degree. And therefore, it's better to say, look, we're aware of what that impact is. We're aware of our limitations. And this is what we plan to do moving forward. But in the meantime, we're going to focus on this, and this area because that's actually going to influence X amount of our footprint. And therefore, we know we can affect change there and we can do it within this time frame. Something that's very specific, that's very appropriate, and it's relevant to that particular organization. So that's, I think, really, really key. But, back in the days when people were making statements, I mean, we'll be net zero by 2027, and I'm thinking you're not. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's absolutely not going to happen. And I think it's very much. I think for a lot of businesses, it's coming from the right place. So, obviously we've got greenwashing, but there's also green wishing, where people are perhaps over-egging what they want to achieve or what they can achieve without actually really having a plan in terms of how that's going to happen. So that's been an area of learning, so that people say, well, actually, you can't really say that because you can't substantiate that and you can't back that. And actually, you probably can't do that. But what you could do is this. So I think there's been a real change in the industry from that perspective.
I agree, and almost the opposite side of the coin to greenwashing is what we're also seeing, which is green hushing. Businesses not wanting to stick their head above the parapet and say these are the things that we are doing. Yeah. They will quietly be doing these things in the background, and they would rather not take any kind of public applause for doing it, because recognizing that actually we don't want to say too much, just in case we say it in the wrong way. Absolutely. Just in case we fall foul of greenwashing claims or anything like that. So there's a lot of work that's happening out there, which is almost being done underground. And I'd love to be able to see it all.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think a lot of it is encouraging, and I think also a lot of businesses don't actually even necessarily realise that what they are doing is actually pretty good, and there are some things that they should be shouting about because they've actually gone down into the detail and the specifics. And when a business has taken action to drive change, there's a value to that in it to its customers. So therefore, they should be saying, look, this because of the actions that we've taken, this is how you, our customer, can benefit from that. So all of that should be applauded and should be communicated. But yeah, I get it. I think there's an element of concern that they're going to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing or do it in a way that they might be shot down if they say something slightly inaccurately. And so there's a lot to do, I think, and there's also a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of not wanting to be exposed for things that actually there is a valid reason as to why they might be doing something. So I think there's often that concern of like, what will they find if we do a carbon footprint report? Will we look bad? But the reality is, it's more important right now to actually be in a position where you know the impact of your activities, so that you can then start to prioritize and actually do something about it, because that's actually going to affect change far faster than just sort of either not dealing with it, clearly, because nothing's going to happen, or kind of just doing the tick box exercises to try and look good. when the reality is you're not really influencing much of your footprint at all, and there could be
Yeah.
areas that are far better spent with your time and effort and resources that are actually going to drive real value and success.
Yeah, and interestingly, I often go into companies, and one of the things I like to do is hold stakeholder interviews with some of the senior people within those businesses to just understand what their appetite is. What is the key driver here? Because you're absolutely right. Many companies, the driver is tick box, basic compliance, because we've got to do that. Others, it comes as a huge surprise to the exec when you start to uncover things that are happening within their own business that they just weren't aware of. A CEO recently said to me, "We're actually better than what we think we are, aren't we?" And I was like, "Yeah, hugely." Your start point is we're doing nothing. Actually, you're doing all of these things, and it's not driven from a central function. It's driven from the bottom up. The people just want to do these things, and are putting forward ideas, and are having those ideas approved, and are running trials of technology in certain areas. And should an exec be aware of everything that's happening in his business? Of course not. But actually, it's quite an eye opener for them when you present things back to them and say, well, actually, these are all the great things that you're doing. So you've already got the base of what you need to build upon. Yeah. And probably the results of this, if we take this to its natural conclusion, is that you are going to reduce your carbon by X% over the course of the next 12 to 24 months just by doing that. Yeah. But I want to come back to a point you made earlier on, the changes that have happened in the last 5 to 6 years. So whereas if I go back to 2019, 20 and 21, we saw big picture. We saw, companies were thinking about things in a really holistic way. Today we see things which need to be broken down a little bit in order to, so rather than present big picture, the whole elephant, let's present, small parts of that element that we can build that picture up. Because I've been criticised in the past about being a little too evangelical in terms of my approach to corporate sustainability. I just think we've got one planet. And, we've got to do as much as we can and as quickly as we can in order to safeguard that for all of the businesses out there, all of the families out there, all of our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren who are coming after us. And so, but sometimes I think, actually, when I present something on a much, much larger scale, it doesn't have the impact. So actually, the way that we're seeing success happen in sustainability at the moment is to look at individual actions and the impact of those actions on both cost, bottom line, so profitability, and also carbon. So the double impact of doing something. That's the thing that I think we are moving towards more of. Businesses think in cycles, whether those cycles are 10-year if you're a much larger organization, 5-year if you're a medium-sized organization, or 1 year if you're a smaller organization. They think in those budget cycles. So our role is to present, this is where you are, this is where you want to get to. We're going to break down that into 10 years or more even for some customers. And in each of those years, we're going to break those down into the 5 things that you could do. And the impact that that's going to have, both on a bottom line and also on a carbon trajectory. So you can start to plot a carbon trajectory out. And I think that's where people are thinking, this works. I get this.
Yeah. And how have you found, so I know for me, certainly, like you said, there's been different cycles and there's been different sort of areas of interest on our journey, if you like, to and how receptive businesses have been. But it's always been sort of, the trick has been to, like, who do you actually speak to? Who do you engage with when you're talking about sustainability? Because it as you said at the beginning, it's something that should be part of every decision that we make, and it should be part of that entire process, properly integrated into. I often say this: it should be part of the very fabric of the business itself. It's just how we operate because we are considering it, and that has at times been focusing very much on the finance side of things. So, we've got that triple bottom line approach where, sustainability isn't just about the carbon footprint. You could be traditionally the bottom line used to be, if we're making money, we're fine, we're safe, we're sustainable, we're okay. The reality now is that you could be making lots of money, but if you're doing that environmentally or socially unacceptably, you won't be making the same amount of money for much longer because people won't want to work for you, people won't want to buy from you, and in fact, in many cases, businesses, or certain businesses, won't be able to buy from you because they have a supply chain compliance program or they have certain procurement restrictions in place, and they need that kind of information. But if you also flip that round, you could be the greenest company in the world, but if you're not making money, then that's also not sustainable. So they all have to be equal in their approach. So when we're making those decisions, when you decouple carbon emissions from economic growth, we want businesses to become as successful as possible, but just do that in the most efficient way. So if you're reducing the intensity of how you operate, that's got to be a good thing, because fewer emissions actually means lower costs, and therefore that's better from a commercial perspective. That's also better from a value offering. That's also better for winning new business, holding on to existing business. So it should be fully understood and fully embraced by every single part of the business for it to genuinely drive value and success and be sustainable.
Yes, I totally agree with you. It has to have a bottom line impact. It has to have a business benefit associated with it. The last 12 months we've seen huge change in the world. Change of government in the UK, and change of focus. I think it's that's a positive thing. But what came with it was uncertainty, cost of living crisis, business impact through the national insurance changes, which actually affected people's available budgets. So we might have been talking with customers about certain projects last September, but I'm afraid by November time those projects were on the back burner until we really understood the impact of the national insurance changes. So it has impacted on businesses. We've seen the second Trump administration coming in the US and their almost anti-green policies associated with that. An increase in fossil fuel production. I even heard stories of some companies removing their whole sustainability teams, for fear that they won't be able to work with companies that have a very much a Republican agenda. All of these things just cause us a little bit of they're bumps in the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the best way to look at it, because I think ultimately everybody understands the reality of the situation that we're in, and we don't need politicians to say, "Oh, you don't need to do this anymore." I think people know, no, we do. And going back to the COVID thing, people saw it when we stop emitting, nature comes back, and everything's actually improving from a natural perspective. But it is frustrating at times when what that tends to cause is just a slowing down of the kind of direction that we need to be traveling in. I don't think it stops anything. I think it just slows things down and causes a bit of misunderstanding, a bit of confusion. And then you start to, hear all sorts of things that, actually human impact on climate change is negligible and it's happening anyway. And it's all a load of alarmist not nonsense. And you think, oh, really? And are we still there where people still have that kind of opinion? And I suppose that's it in a nutshell. It's opinion, not fact. And it's sometimes it's a little bit frustrating when you're having to go back to really genuinely demonstrate that there's very, very clear scientific evidence that global warming through human activity is very, very clear, and the rapid rate in which the intensity has increased, particularly since the Industrial Revolution, you can trace it directly to, the human use of fossil fuels, the isotopic signature of, lack of carbon-14 in the atmosphere, even though CO2 is increasing. That's a direct link to what we're doing. And there's also evidence around the satellite imagery of the lower and upper atmosphere. If it was natural global warming, those things would be happening at the same time, whereas actually the lower atmosphere is warming whilst the upper atmosphere is cooling, which is actually, again, another direct link to our activity. So it's really, really clear. And the worrying thing is that we shouldn't be slowing down at all. We should be accelerating. And I think some people worry that it's about stopping things like stopping people from being able to do certain things, and it's not about highlighting the wrong or stopping people or restricting people. It's just about looking at things differently. Energy. I did an article recently on how buildings potentially, there's new technology that means that buildings could literally be self-sufficient. They could be generating their own power literally through the bricks and the cement of the building itself. You've got pavements that could be lighting up themselves. There's energy happening through the change of a temperature. So when you've got the heat of the day and then it goes into the night, that temperature change actually generates power. I saw something as well in I think it was in Paris, where the turnstiles in train stations, they've implemented that across the board. Students actually came up with that idea, and I think that's generating enough power for something like 60,000 homes in the region. I mean, it's perfect. Like, we need energy, we need innovation, we need change, we need to be able to do things, but we just don't want to damage the planet by doing those things. So if there's a way that means that there's no impact, and we're not using fossil fuels and we're not generating extra carbon. I mean, natural carbon is a natural phenomenon, is required for us to live on this planet, but that's not in question. What's in question is how much we're adding to it. So if we can stop adding to it, then the innovation that can be had is just utterly phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of innovation out there. I mean, you've got to go to all of the industry shows, and you're just blown away by by what is available. I also think there's a real benefit in the UK happening at the moment around ground-mounted solar, and the fact that we are seeing a relaxation for industrial land and some agricultural land, that we can more quickly build solar facilities. Having just gone through a project for a client looking at a number of sites around the UK, you also understand how fragile our electrical network is, such that in some areas you could not export anything back out to the grid, because the grid simply wouldn't handle it. So I do think there's a big infrastructure piece that needs to take place. But it's great to see that this current government have relaxed the rules and starting working on the planning for some of those projects at the moment, and I'll report back on if planning is in line with the government policy next time we speak. But it's great to see these things taking
so
place.
Encouraging. It's just, I mean, what can be done is, like you say, it's mind blowing. I mean, seeing what is possible in the very near future. Some of it's like science fiction, but it's almost ready. And it's exciting to see, and it's great that so many pioneers are actually going above and beyond and doing things, because that's what it takes to be able to do this. I mean, you look at the risks that the global risks report, for instance, in terms of what we face as a planet over the next 10 years. 5 of the 6 biggest issues are all climate change related, and that's concerning, but also it shows there's an opportunity to actually do something about it. And I think, and the businesses that genuinely drive sustainability as their offering, and their value proposition will be the businesses that are really successful moving forward. Because everyone's going to be sitting there scratching their heads thinking, well, how am I going to get to net zero when 80% of my footprint's in the supply chain and I don't control that? And they're thinking, well,
Absolutely.
okay, I mean, I can do all the, energy efficient lighting, I can change my fleet of vehicles, I can do all the things that I can do, but if I can only influence 10 or 20% of my footprint, like, how am I going to get to the rest? So most businesses out there, if not all, are searching for ways in which they can make changes or buy differently or utilize services that are going to help them to reduce their footprint. And the businesses that make that possible for their clients are going to be the ones that are going to be massively successful moving forward.
And I think that is the biggest challenge for every organization out there at the moment. And
Yeah.
it is to get your arms around your supply chain.
Yeah.
Firstly, to measure
Yeah.
the emissions associated with that, to heat map across your supply chain, where your key areas of focus need to be,
Yeah.
and then start engaging with those suppliers to help them drive change.
Yeah.
But there's also a bit that comes before that, and that's around supplier selection. That's an easy win.
Yeah.
Ensuring that any supplier that you work with holds the same level of ambition than as you as an organization have in terms of carbon reduction. That's the first piece.
Well, it goes back to, we all know what the price of something is. So if you're just buying blindly from any supplier just because the price is right, price is one thing, everyone can see it because it's in black and white on the bill. But what's the actual cost of doing business with that company? Is that if
Yes.
I choose to buy from you, am I making things difficult for myself moving forward, because that's actually part of my footprint because I commissioned it to happen? And yet, if I haven't understood the impact of the decision that I'm now making, is that going to make life much more difficult for me when I'm trying to actually get on my business to closer to net zero? So that sort of the price and impact element is becoming really critical, and I think that's what's driving a lot of the sort of rate of change that we're seeing, actually far quicker than legislation. Legislation is obviously capturing certain businesses of certain sizes, and that will obviously just get rolled out more and more, and eventually everyone will be having to report on their footprint. But what we're seeing now is that the businesses that do have to comply are basically saying, well, look, that's highlighting areas that I now need to focus on. And therefore, every time I engage with a supplier, I need to know what kind of impact that has on my business. Otherwise, I may or may not be able to buy from that supplier. And also,
Absolutely.
that's why we're seeing the kind of questions that are being now asked that were never being asked before. It used to be just tick the box to say I've got an environmental policy, and don't worry, no one will actually ask to see the thing. And if they do, we'll quickly put something together. Now it's obviously you're reporting on your footprint. Obviously, you can tell me what your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are. But have you set net zero targets? When are you going to get there? And what impact do you have specifically on my business? And suddenly people are thinking, well, and also, how are you going to help me get to net zero? And we've got companies that are, well, we're an HVAC provider or we're a catering company. Like, I'm not a carbon measurement specialist. I don't know how I'm going to get you to net zero. So that's when, if they can actually integrate it into their offering and make it part of their value proposition, then suddenly they're a really attractive supplier to buy from, because they can actually provide them with that insight. And we know that the need for information is only going to increase. So the businesses now that are saying, when you buy from us, you'll know exactly what the impact is, you'll know where it's coming from, you'll know what we're doing about it, and you'll know when we're going to get it to net zero. Suddenly that's really attractive to buy from, because it's essentially making me look good by buying from you.
But I also think there's a danger in terms of supplier engagement. We're seeing some companies take almost a hammer to crack a nut approach, and say, you must do this, you must do that, rather than engaging and working at the pace of the supplier and supporting that supplier. We are seeing some companies, very much take, I'm talking, major supermarket chains and their approach to their supplier management, which sometimes could be better, but they very much have the stick rather than the carrot approach.
Yeah, which is frustrating, isn't it? Because,
Yeah.
it's kind of in some ways counterproductive and would actually slow down the process. Because if you have a
Yeah.
blanket requirement, like everyone must do this, like for instance, I think we had this conversation before around, large organization essentially is mandating that their entire supply chain does SBTI. Now,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, SBTI is fantastic and has very much has its place, and probably ultimately
Yeah.
is what we're all going to end up doing anyway to
Yeah.
get to a verifiable net zero status. But there are some limitations in the sense that it might not necessarily be directly appropriate for every single business. Micro SMEs might be doing some fantastic things and reporting on their footprint and choosing to do what they can do and actually generating results. And yet, if they haven't got SBTI, they failed. And actually, an SBTI commitment is one thing. And yes, obviously, there's a time limit you've got to respond within a certain time frame. But actually, that's kind of negating maybe years of work that's small SMEs done. That should be applauded because it's actually fantastic and probably, dare I say, even higher than an SBTI commitment
Yeah.
at that particular point in time. So don't penalise the smaller SMEs for not signing up to something because it actually might not be the most appropriate thing for them to do anyway.
Yeah, and we're seeing instances at the moment whereby suppliers were pushed by their main contracting parties to undertake an SBTI commitment process, and that was maybe 18 months or so ago. Now, they're within 6 months of needing to publish a transition plan. Otherwise, SBTI is removed away from them. The one thing I'm saying to all businesses is before you make any commitments and set targets and send your data to them to validate, understand how you're going to get there, because this is transition has got to come before making a commitment. So that the commitment that you are making is in line with all of the actions that you're agreeing to take and the capital requirements to undertake those actions. So a transition plan doesn't just say do these 10 things. It says do these 10 things in this order. Ring fence this amount of capital per annum to do each of these things, and then there's a piece around the CFO will have to get involved in, which is I need to understand what the ROI associated with delivering that project as opposed to that project is, because there's a prioritization piece here as well. But lots of companies have been pushed down that route. Yesterday we saw a customer who had lost his SBTI standing and therefore lost one of his main customers as a result of that. If only they'd done it in such a way that was logical, which was understanding start point in terms of your overall scope 1 to scope 2 carbon footprint, understanding the actions that you're going to be taking to deliver those, including the engagement with your supply chain, because that's a really important piece as well. And be realistic about these things. Only then that you've got that, do you then go back to the SBTI and say, okay, we've set our targets. It may not be as ambitious as many companies want to do, are showing you. But this is realistic.
It's realistic.
And we've also banked this capital associated with the delivery of that target.
Well, that goes back to the whole element that we said at the beginning, is that when you're making statements, you're making commitments, or you're setting targets, they're genuine and they're appropriate and they can be achieved. It's pointless saying we're going to reduce our footprint by 50% in the next 3 years without any plan of or understanding of is that even possible, let alone can we even do it. So it's far better to say, actually, we've highlighted X, Y, and Z areas within our emissions drivers. We know we can influence these two, and we know by influencing to the best of our ability, we can reduce those elements by this much, and that's going to result in a 5% reduction in our total footprint within the next 3 years. That's far better because it's accurate, it's appropriate, it's time bound, and you set that target and you're actually going to hit that target, and then you've got a successful carbon reduction plan because you've actually said, well, we said we were going to do this, and we did because it was appropriate. It's a bit like saying to a haulage company, look, just do fewer deliveries because that's going to reduce your footprint. Well, that's the end of that conversation instantly, because that's the nature of their business. I can't tell the airline industry just fly less. That's all your carbon reduction plan you need to. It's got to be appropriate. It's got to be specific. and it's got to be relevant to what is achievable. Similarly, when the government set out the initial transition to EV vehicles, and again, target being set without a genuine plan in place, and if we transitioned every single vehicle to EV, we'd need something like 60 gigawatts power stations, and at the moment we've got 3. So we wouldn't even be able to do that anyway. So, and then there was a relaxing of the time frame of that. So these things need to be very well thought through, and they have to be appropriate, and they should be the right solution for the right organization. There is literally no one size fits all, everyone must do this, because that isn't necessarily going to work for lots of different organizations.
That's a very, very good point. It needs to be appropriate to the organization. It needs to support, and this is where getting into an organization, really understanding their drivers, their culture, and building a transition plan, which also involves the people team. It also involves the facilities team. It also involves the operations team, so that everybody is a part of that delivery and buys into it. That's the only way these things are going to work.
For sure.
Having spent a period of my time focusing on the importance of engaging with customers, getting it right, if you can do it well, then that's meaningful, and will support the trajectory of that customer towards achieving their goals. If you do it wrong, you get everybody's backs up and nobody wants to play a part of it.
And that's gonna halt results very, very quickly, or at least ensure that you don't get anywhere near where you're hoping to get to. You're absolutely right. Everyone's got to be empowered with the understanding of what they need to do, why they need to do it, when they do it, it's going to make this much of a difference. And there's been all sorts of clever actions being taken by some businesses where they're really trying to drive through behavioral change, and they're gamifying that whole approach so that actually people feel like it's enjoyable to get involved with, and it's a bit of fun and a bit of competition maybe, and we're going to get something from it. So again, just changing the mindset. It's not about stopping people doing something. It's about, let's just think about things slightly differently, and if we can have a bit of fun with it at the same time, then that could genuinely drive some serious results. And people don't necessarily even understand, if we do things slightly differently and we do that as a whole, there's actually a huge amount that we can achieve, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be costly things to do. It could just be just doing things slightly differently. But the starting point needs to be like, what is the impact of that activity? And if we made just a little bit of a difference, what could we actually achieve by doing that? What would the result be? And then suddenly you've got a plan then, because actually, we could do that. And it's not a huge ask. Like we could do that. And if we did that, as well as that, and as well as that, actually, before you know it, we're reducing our footprint significantly, and we've started that journey. But yeah, it's been a challenge for sure, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and I will come back to a conversation you and I had on the phone one Friday a few weeks back around the use of data and the use of spend-based data in Scope 3 calculations. And I would just stick out a warning here that spend-based data is great as a start point. It shouldn't be used more than once though. If spend-based data is all about the money that you spend on certain items that you haven't got the activity data together in order to push through onto, and I often hear, if we manage to reduce the cost of that widget, does that count as a carbon reduction? And I'm like, well, I suppose if all you're doing is using spend-based data, then yes, it does. But in reality, you're probably buying exactly the same number of widgets, which have exactly the same carbon associated with their manufacturers. So no.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that I think most people probably aren't necessarily that aware of. But I mean, for anyone listening, spend-based metrics are designed to ensure that if you don't have that primary data, you don't have that activity-based information, or your suppliers aren't giving you any information, then all you've got is, well, how much have we spent on something? And it's categorizing a total level of spend in a certain category. So X amount of spend in that material or X amount of spend on that kind of service equals X in terms of your carbon footprint. Great way to ensure that you've taken back control, in the sense that if people are not, or your suppliers aren't giving you any information, then you're not reliant on those suppliers to give you information. You can basically apply a spend-based metric and then understand what your supply chain footprint overall looks like, the limitations, and Scott, you're absolutely right, it can't be just relied upon because you're not going to affect any change. So really what you want to be able to do is get the overview, so we know, okay, 70% of my footprints come from the supply chain and it's this sort of figure, and it's come from these sort of categories. What that doesn't do is tell you which supplier or which choices that we're making have driven the highest footprint. So you absolutely need to move away from the spend-based metric as you move forward and continue and improve to activity-based information. And that's when you can start to engage with suppliers directly to say, look, we want to do business with you, but you're a major part of our footprint. We need to understand where that footprint's coming from, what you're doing about it, and when you're going to reduce it down to, and when you're going to get to net zero, because all of those activities are directly impacting that customer's footprint.
Yeah.
So, but then you've opened up the opportunity. You're then engaged, and then you can start to say, well, look, help me to help you. Like, I'm going to buy more from you if you can help me reduce my footprint. So it makes sense for all of us. So let's jump on that together and actually go down into the detail. Spend-based gives you the overview, doesn't give you the actual suppliers by supplier detail.
Anything in terms of carbon footprinting around spend-based data, because the variances can be quite big. When you convert that spend-based data into activity-based data in future years. So just a word of caution, just go into it with your eyes open, maybe speak, put a little bit of a buffer, a risk buffer in, before communicating.
Absolutely right. And, talking about risk, that one of the things that we're really seeing in more recent times is people are looking for funding, or people are looking at valuations of a business. Risk when the ESG credentials aren't there, or there's not a proper carbon reduction plan in place. Investors are seeing that, and buyers are seeing that as an actual risk, because it is. If it's not there, it's going to be needed, and therefore, what am I going to uncover by when I implement that change? How much is that going to cost? What changes am I going to have to make to be able to capture the relevant data in the first place? And so it's genuinely being seen by the money people, as well as the clients, as well as the staff, as well as the the people in the business itself. So it's very much, everyone is now aware, and they should be, but that's another major driver to actually affect change, because if you don't have those things in place, then it's going to start hitting you in the pocket, as well as obviously reputationally and keeping hold of great talent and attracting the right kind of clients and things. So it's a very much a requirement these days, a hygiene aspect rather than a nice to have.
100%. Comes back to one of the first things that we were talking about, the differences between a customer that wants to do the right thing and that wants to do the bare minimum. I think ultimately most customers want to do the right thing. Business is a force for good. We see this in all aspects of what we do. The culture, the diversity, the equality, all of the S, pieces of S in the ESG. Because a lot of people are looking for inspiration at the moment.
Because it's a difficult topic. It's something that, unless you've lived and breathed it, could be quite complicated, and you don't necessarily know what the best course of action to take is. Also, what challenges am I going to face? How am I going to make this work in a way that is good for the business? So when I think, when the stories are being told, and it's one of the things that we want to cover on the podcast, is that we want to make sure that people are able to listen in on those conversations, and I want people to be as honest as possible when they've genuinely had a challenge, or they tried something and it didn't work. And also, when we did do something, what did it do for the business? Like, how did it drive the value, and how did it win us a new contract? And so again, inspiring people and empowering people with information, so that hopefully they get benefit from it, and they will then start their journey and start moving in the right direction as well.
And I think around customers having decisions to make, choices, who they buy product from. You talked about staff and talent. We are always trying to recruit and keep, in any business, in any function, the right people. Sustainability and the credibility of sustainability within those organizations is becoming a factor that people consider when they look to work in those organizations. I've got a daughter who's 28 and has worked for 3 or 4 businesses. And
that's not possible.
All of those
Scott.
businesses.
You can't have a 28-year-old. You can't have a 28-year-old.
Well, I know.
Do you know what I'm saying that because I've got a 28-year-old as well, and it's ridiculous. I mean, surely that can't be possible. I feel old enough to have it.
Well, I'm not sure if your child is the same as my daughter, but she actually starts to look at businesses and what the businesses are doing and says, is this a company I want to be a part of? Exactly. Do I want to spend a year working with these people if they don't hold the same moral values as I do? And
it's incredibly important.
That's a really important thing. And I think businesses need to consider this because it isn't just about the risk of losing a customer, through a contract if you're not achieving, the carbon reduction targets that those customers are expecting you to achieve. It's about losing staff.
Yeah.
And not being able to attract staff when you lose those staff.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Is it Gen Z? And I'm not even sure what the next one is. But these are people that have grown up understanding about climate change, understanding about social justice, understanding about equality and diversity, and these are our leaders of the future.
Oh, completely.
And that gives me huge hope. Absolutely huge hope. But we need to attract them. We need to support them once we're there. We need to listen to them because they're going to have some fantastic ideas about how we should be doing things. These eureka type projects that exist across numerous businesses at the moment, to listen to the staff, listen to what so this is the building something from the ground up approach in terms of sustainability. Let's listen to our people. Let's encourage them to put forward ideas. Let's support them in terms of bringing those ideas to life and giving them projects to run and helping them in terms of developing their own careers. And that's why a head of sustainability isn't just something that sits over here in this organisation. It's something that is supported by every single manager across the business. It doesn't matter what function they do, to bring sustainability to life. And that's how I've managed my career. And up until now is working with people as opposed to against them.
Absolutely right.
And one of the things that you guys are brilliant at doing is cutting through all of the crap that's out there to make sustainability an easy to understand concept, and not a black art as some businesses out there present it to be. And that's what I've always prided myself on as well. The fact that I can help new people coming into a business in a sustainability function develop. And I always say to everybody, there's a 1,000-piece puzzle that you're trying to build here. Day one, you'll probably get the corners in place. By end of month one, you've probably got some of the outline being built. And then actually the rest of your career is completing that picture. I've still not completed my 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. And I never will, because the market changes so much.
Exactly. Absolutely. No, you're so right. And that's a great analogy, actually. And, it's encouraging to see that there are a lot of businesses out there who are making those changes, who are listening to the younger generations, and not making blanket decisions about, this is what they want. When what do we know what the younger generation want? We need to ask them what they want, and we need to include them into what they want, because you're right, they've lived and breathed it from day one. They understand that they're aligned with that approach, and if they are then part of the decisions that we're now going to make to address those and to do the right thing and move in the right direction, then that's got to be better, because they're the ones that, like you said, are going to be taking the reins and moving it forward anyway. So let's include them now and and make sure that we are attracting the right type of talent, and making sure that they are supported and can affect change. So it is encouraging to see that is now starting to happen more and more, and it also drives the whole journey. When it used to be a few years back, well, maybe a few more than a few years back, but when you're knocking on people's doors and you're saying, "Oh, hi, can I talk to you about your carbon footprint?" and just get a blank face, like, why do I need to do that? I'm definitely not paying for it. and
Exactly.
Now it's
Exactly.
like, well, actually, it's so intrinsically linked into everything we do. So, oh, I've just lost on a tender because I don't have a credible carbon reduction plan in place, or
Yeah.
I can't compete against that supplier, and I'm going to lose my biggest client to them, who we've had for the last 10 years. I can't get the right staff because people are asking for us for things that we haven't got in place yet. It's so involved in all aspects. I think people are realizing now that even if they've not specifically been asked a question about what your carbon footprint is, they actually are realizing that we do need to get on this journey, because it's not just that client asking me that question that I need to try and answer in a tender. It's involved in everything about the business and all the people within the business, and the impact that we have as a business. All of that is part of the reason why they need to understand. Make a start. It doesn't have to be perfect, but make a start. Let's start to understand where we are as a business, and what can and can't be done, and then start planning around that. Thanks for listening to Emission Possible. If today's episode sparked an idea or presented a challenge, please reach out and let us know. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned, because net zero is absolutely possible.